My sister-in-law pointed to my dead child as evidence that I was a terrible father, so I showed everyone just how great a mother she really is. My sister-in-law has always been the kind of person who simply needs to one-up you. Like the day she found out I got a cat, she immediately took in 3 stray dogs that she can't care for. When she found out my wife took up Pilates, she started going to the gym to do real exercise. But by far the biggest thing about her is how she needs her kids to be better than ours. For example, our oldest son is nationally ranked in spelling bees, which she loves to mock as dictionary nerd stuff. Her son, on the other hand, does real activities like travel soccer. Another example is how during our kindergarten sports day, she coached her son to literally trip our son in the class race. He did as he was told and naturally finished ahead of our son. Immediately after, my sister-in-law got in my face screaming about how my son was a loser. The thing was, my wife and I still managed to stomach her despite everything. But then it happened. Our daughter had a severe allergic reaction in the school cafeteria. The school didn't have emergency EpiPens on site like they're legally required to. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. We tried to sue, but the school's lawyers found some technicality in the liability waiver we'd signed. They called it a tragic accident, and nobody was ever held accountable. My wife and I were crushed, and my SIL's response made us feel even worse. We already felt like monsters. When at the funeral, my sister-in-law started whispering to people about how this is why she makes sure her kids always have everything they need. As if that wasn't bad enough, she started posting on Facebook about raising resilient children who can handle anything and don't have any health issues. My wife and I were furious, but we're grieving so hard we decided not to say anything until the pool party. It was one of my sister-in-law's kids' birthdays. We were trying to keep normal. My SIL was holding court as usual, bragging about her latest expensive purchases for her kids when it happened. Suddenly, her children came running outside screaming at me that my daughter was choking inside. I went white. Pure terror flooded through me. I sprinted into the house, and that's when I found my daughter sitting at the kitchen table calmly drinking water. My sister's kids were giggling behind me. My daughter looked confused, asking if I was okay. That's when I realized nothing was wrong, and that this was my sister-in-law's kids' idea of a prank. I remember losing it on them. I turned around and started lecturing all the kids about how cruel that was. My wife was in the bathroom, so she missed everything. But when she came down, she saw was SIL storming in, screaming at me not to dare yell at her precious angels. Commotion started up, and when I tried explaining why this wasn't funny, she cut me off with the words that changed everything. Look at Father of the Year over here. Maybe if you spent more time actually watching your kids, Emma would still be alive. I didn't even know what to say. My wife just collapsed sobbing. My sister-in-law stood smug, and nobody dared to say a word to her. That's when something in me went cold. If my family was set on enabling this monster, I'd handle her myself. And so, my wife and I spent weeks planning what we were going to do. We knew how much my sister-in-law despised the idea of being below us. And so, we started casually mentioning to her how we were scaling back on personal expenses to give our kids better opportunities. We dropped hints about all these amazing private schools, trips abroad, clubs we were planning on enrolling our kids in. Of course, my sister walked right into this. Within weeks, she was scrambling to enroll her kids into schools 2 hours away just so they could be better than the schools our kids would attend. She was forcing her husband to pawn family heirlooms so they could go on cruises around Europe. She hired personal educational consultants for her kids to keep up with our kids' new supposed all A's they were getting from their tutors. She started forcing her kid to study material 3 grades above them because we mentioned ours were doing 2 at a family dinner. My wife and I felt kind of bad. Her kids were getting sick from stress and becoming shells of the outgoing children they were. But our point needed to be made. What made this all really work was how by this point we actually lived over an hour away from each other, and our kids attended different schools. They had no proof we were lying. And then came our real masterpiece. My wife mentioned that we were looking at putting a down payment on a house in a nicer neighborhood. My SIL immediately started house hunting in the most luxurious neighborhoods, then convinced my brother to take out a home equity loan for the down payment. By month 6, one of her kids was hospitalized for severe anxiety. My brother discovered over $200,000 in hidden debt. Her children were begging to return to their normal activities, but she kept pushing. It all culminated at my mother's birthday gathering when I finally dropped the bomb on them. My SIL arrived looking frazzled with her miserable kids, and my brother seeming completely broken. And it's during dinner that I stood up and said I had something important to share with everyone. I cleared my throat and watched as everyone turned to look at me. My hands were steady, even though my heart was pounding. I glanced at my wife, who gave me the smallest nod. I need to tell you all something important, I said, keeping my voice level. For the past 6 months, my wife and I have been lying about everything. The room went silent. Forks stopped moving. My sister-in-law's face went from confused to pale in seconds. What do you mean lying? My mother asked, setting down her wine glass. I took a breath. We never enrolled our kids in private schools. There were no tutors, no advanced programs, no trips abroad. We made it all up. My sister-in-law's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her hands started shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. You're joking, she whispered. No joke, my wife said calmly, pulling out her phone. We documented everything. Every lie we told. Every time you immediately tried to one-up us. My brother's face had gone white. He turned to his wife. The loans, the house, the schools. You destroyed your finances chasing lies, I said flatly, because you couldn't stand the thought of our kids doing better than yours. My sister-in-law started hyperventilating. Her chest heaved as she pointed a trembling finger at us. You ruined my life. How could you do this to me? How could we? My wife's voice was ice cold. She tapped her phone screen. Let me remind you of something. The audio filled the room. My sister-in-law's voice, clear as day at Emma's funeral. This is why I make sure my kids always have everything they need. Some parents just aren't careful enough. Several relatives who hadn't been at the funeral gasped. My cousin put her hand over her mouth. My aunt's face twisted in disgust. You said that at her funeral? Uncle Nicholas breathed, staring at my sister-in-law. My brother suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His whole body was shaking. We're in debt. Massive debt. Over $200,000. My sister-in-law whipped around to face him. Don't you dare blame this on me. If you made more money like a real man, we wouldn't have needed loans. Their oldest child, who'd been silent until now, suddenly slammed his hands on the table. Mom is crazy, he yelled. She makes us study until we throw up. Every single day. The middle child's voice cracked as she added, she screams at us for hours if we get anything below perfect. I hate it. I hate her. The youngest, only 7, ran from his seat and hid behind Grandma's chair, sobbing. You're lying, my sister-in-law shrieked at her children. They poisoned you against me! She lunged toward the youngest, trying to grab him. him. Grandma stood up and blocked her path. Don't you touch that child. These are my children, my sister-in-law screamed. My brother reached into his jacket with shaking hands and pulled out a stack of papers. I found your secret credit cards, 7 of them. He threw the statements on the table, maxed out, every single one. My sister-in-law snatched the papers and started ripping them up. This is financial abuse. You're trying to control me. We have recordings, I said quietly. Every cruel thing you said about Emma, every lie you told about us, everything. I'll tell everyone you're evil, she screamed at me. I'll destroy you. I don't care anymore, I said simply. Grandma's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Nobody is welcome in my house until this is resolved. I'm done with this family tearing itself apart. You always hated me, my sister-in-law spat at her. From day one, I'm tired of your competitions and cruelty, Grandma said firmly. Enough is enough. My brother moved toward his children. Kids, we're going to stay with your other grandparents for a while. My sister-in-law rushed to block the dining room door. You're not taking my children anywhere. The oldest child pulled out his phone. I'll call Grandma McCatherine myself. She'll come get us. My sister-in-law frantically grabbed her own phone and started dialing. We could all hear her mother's voice through the speaker. Mom, they're trying to take my kids. You need to help me. Your husband already called me about the debt. Her mother's tired voice replied. I can't help you anymore. What? My sister-in-law's voice cracked. You have to help me. I'm done enabling you. Figure it out yourself. The line went dead. My sister-in-law hurled her phone against the wall. It shattered into pieces. We'll pay for family therapy, I offered. For the kids. For everyone. She turned and spat at me. The glob of saliva hit my shirt. Several people cried out in disgust. I'm sorry, my brother said to the room. He physically moved his wife away from the door, his hands firm on her shoulders. I'm so sorry for everything. The children ran past their mother and out the door. We could hear car doors slamming outside. My sister-in-law broke free and chased after them, screaming, You can't leave. I'm your mother. You can't leave me. Through the window, we watched her pound on the car windows as my brother started the engine. Several neighbors had come out of their houses to stare. Don't leave me, she shrieked as the car pulled away. This is all your fault. She turned and pointed at our house. Grandma walked to the door. You need to leave my house, now. I'm not going anywhere, my sister-in-law screamed. Uncle Nicholas already had his phone out. I'm calling you a ride. It'll be here in 10 minutes. My sister-in-law stood in the middle of the room, her hair wild, makeup running down her face. This is all your fault, she kept repeating, staring at me. All your fault. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody comforted her. We all just waited in silence until the car arrived. She left still screaming accusations, her voice echoing down the street as the driver pulled away. The house felt empty afterward. Family members slowly started cleaning up the ruined birthday dinner. My mother sat at the table, her face in her hands. I should have stopped this years ago, she whispered. My wife and I stayed to help clean. Neither of us felt victorious. We'd protected ourselves, but the cost had been astronomical. 3 children traumatized, a marriage destroyed, a family shattered. But at least the truth was finally out. At least the cycle of cruelty had been exposed. As we drove home that night, I thought about Emma, about how she would have hated seeing her cousins in so much pain. But maybe, just maybe, they'd have a chance at a normal life now. Maybe we all would. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls and text messages. My sister-in-law had apparently taken up residence on her mother's couch, but that didn't stop her from launching a full-scale campaign to get her life back. She called my brother 47 times in the first 3 days alone. When he stopped answering, she moved on to me. The first voicemail came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Her voice was hoarse from crying, but the venom was still there. She demanded I call her back immediately to fix what I'd broken. The second message arrived 20 minutes later, this time threatening to sue us for emotional damages. By the 5th message, she was alternating between sobbing and screaming that I'd stolen her children. My brother, meanwhile, had taken the kids to stay with his parents in the next state over. He called me on day 4, sounding exhausted but determined. The children were enrolled in therapy, and already the therapist had concerns about the level of academic pressure they'd been under. The oldest had been getting up at 4 a.m. to study because his mother said anything less than perfect grades meant he was worthless. The middle child had developed a nervous tic from the stress. The youngest still flinched whenever anyone raised their voice. On day 7, my sister-in-law showed up at our house. I was at work, but my wife was home with our son. She heard the pounding on the door first, then the screaming. Through the security camera, she watched my sister-in-law pace back and forth on our porch, alternating between begging to be let in and threatening to break down the door. My wife called me immediately. I left work and drove home, but by the time I arrived, my sister-in-law had been there for over 2 hours. Several neighbors had gathered on their lawns, watching the spectacle. Mrs. Chen from next door had already called the police twice, but my sister-in-law hadn't technically done anything illegal yet. I parked down the street and approached carefully. My sister-in-law's hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled. She looked nothing like the perfectly put-together woman who used to brag about her designer outfits. The moment she saw me, she charged. I stepped back quickly as she stumbled, catching herself on our mailbox. The neighbors watched with a mixture of concern and fascination. She started ranting about how I'd destroyed her family, how her children had been brainwashed, how everyone was against her. I stood there silently, letting her words wash over me. After 20 minutes, she seemed to run out of steam, collapsing onto our lawn and sobbing. A police car pulled up then, called by another concerned neighbor. The officers approached carefully, speaking to her in calm tones. She tried to explain that I'd stolen her children, that this was all a conspiracy against her. The officers looked at me questioningly, but I just shook my head. They eventually convinced her to leave, warning her about trespassing. As her Uber pulled away, she pressed her face against the window, still mouthing threats I couldn't hear. That night, the social media campaign began. My sister-in-law created a new Facebook account since most of the family had blocked her original one. She posted a lengthy manifesto about how my wife and I were master manipulators who had turned her entire family against her. She claimed we'd been planning this for years, that we were jealous of her success and had systematically worked to destroy her. The post was shared 3 times before anyone realized what was happening. My cousin called to warn me, and I spent the evening fielding calls from extended family members who wanted to know if there was any truth to her claims. Most had been at the birthday dinner and seen her meltdown firsthand, but a few distant relatives who only knew her through social media started questioning our side of the story. My wife and I decided not to engage. We had recordings of her cruel comments, documentation of our lies, and witnesses to her behavior. We didn't need to defend ourselves on Facebook. By the end of week 2, my brother filed for separation. He called me the night before, his voice heavy with exhaustion and regret. He'd found more hidden credit cards, more secret loans. The house they'd bought in the expensive neighborhood was already in foreclosure proceedings. His parents were helping him find a lawyer, but the financial damage was catastrophic. The kids, at least, were starting to show signs signs of recovery. Without the constant pressure to be perfect, they were rediscovering what it meant to be children. The oldest had asked if he could quit the advanced mathematics program his mother had forced him into. The middle child wanted to try art classes instead of the intensive language tutoring she'd been subjected to. The youngest just wanted to play with toys without being told he was wasting valuable learning time. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, my sister-in-law attempted a different strategy. She showed up at my mother's house during Sunday dinner, dressed impeccably and carrying a homemade pie. She'd clearly showered, done her makeup, and put on her best outfit. For a moment, she almost looked like her old self. My mother, caught off guard, let her in. By the time she called to warn us, my sister-in-law was already seated at the dining table, calmly explaining to gathered relatives how this had all been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. We arrived to find her holding court, spinning a tale about how stressed she'd been, how the pressure of modern parenting had gotten to her. She admitted to being perhaps overly competitive, but claimed that was only because she wanted the best for her children. Several relatives seemed to be buying it, nodding sympathetically as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Then she made her crucial mistake. She mentioned that her children had been poisoned against her by their father and by us. She claimed we'd filled their heads with lies, that they were too young to understand what was really happening. That's when my teenage niece, who'd been quiet until then, spoke up. She'd been babysitting my sister-in-law's kids for years and had seen things the adults hadn't. She described finding the middle child crying in a closet because she'd gotten a 98 on a test instead of 100. She talked about the oldest sneaking food because his mother had put him on a diet to improve his athletic performance in sports he didn't even enjoy. She mentioned the youngest wetting the bed whenever he knew he had to recite multiplication tables the next day. The room fell silent. My sister-in-law's carefully constructed facade cracked. She turned on my niece, calling her a liar, saying she'd never hire her again. But the damage was done. The relatives who'd been sympathetic moments before now looked uncomfortable. My mother asked her to leave. My sister-in-law refused, claiming she had every right to be there, that this was still her family. The argument escalated until Uncle Nicholas physically escorted her to the door. She left screaming about lawyers and custody rights and defamation. A month after the birthday dinner, things had settled into an uneasy routine. My brother and the kids were still with his parents, slowly rebuilding their lives. The children were in therapy 3 times a week, working through years of emotional manipulation. My brother had taken a second job to start paying down the debt, and his parents were helping where they could. My sister-in-law had moved back in with her mother permanently. We heard through the grapevine that she'd gotten a job at a local boutique, though she'd already been written up twice for telling customers their children weren't as well dressed as hers used to be. She'd attempted to start a parenting blog about maintaining excellence in child rearing, but it had gained no traction. The custody battle began in month 2. My sister-in-law, despite having no money for a decent lawyer, insisted on fighting for full custody. She represented herself in court, which went about as well as expected. She accused the judge of bias, claimed the court system was rigged against mothers, and at one point had to be removed for contempt when she wouldn't stop interrupting the proceedings. The judge ordered supervised visitation only, citing concerns about the children's mental health and her inability to recognize the harm she'd caused. The first visit was a disaster. She spent the entire hour telling the children how their father had ruined their lives, how they'd never get into good colleges now, how disappointed she was in them for betraying her. The supervisor ended the visit early. The children came out in tears, and the youngest refused to go back the next week. The older two lasted 3 more visits before they too asked to stop. The court appointed a child advocate who recommended suspending visitation until my sister-in-law completed parenting classes and therapy. She refused both, insisting there was nothing wrong with her parenting style. By month 3, the extended family had largely moved on. Sunday dinners resumed without her presence. Holiday planning went forward without considering her input. She sent long emails about being excluded, about the family's cruelty, about how we'd all regret this when her children grew up to be failures. Most people had blocked her email address by then. I ran into her once at the grocery store during month 4. She was buying generic brands, a far cry from the organic, expensive foods she used to brag about feeding her children. She saw me before I could avoid her, and for a moment I thought she might cause a scene. Instead, she looked at me with hollow eyes and asked, "Are you happy now?" I thought about her children, finally free to be kids. I thought about my brother, slowly rebuilding his life and relationship with his children. I thought about family gatherings without constant competition and cruelty. "I'm not happy about any of this," I told her honestly, "but it had to stop." She laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my life over a joke. My kids played one harmless prank, and you destroyed everything." I wanted to remind her about Emma, about the funeral, about years of cruelty, but I could see she still didn't understand. In her mind, she would always be the victim. I left without saying anything else. By month 5, my brother had moved into a small apartment with the kids. It wasn't much, but the children decorated their shared rooms with their own artwork, something their mother had never allowed because it looked messy. They were still in therapy, but the reports were encouraging. They were learning to accept less than perfection, to enjoy activities for fun rather than competition, to exist without constant pressure. My sister-in-law's social media presence had evolved into something darker. She'd joined online groups for alienated parents and spent her time posting about parental alienation and fathers' rights groups supposedly working against mothers. She'd crafted an entirely fictional narrative where she was a devoted mother whose children had been stolen by a manipulative ex-husband and his vindictive family. Some people in these groups believed her, offering sympathy and advice about fighting the system. She'd found a new audience for her victim narrative, people who didn't know the real story. Month 6 arrived with unexpected news. My brother had been offered a job transfer to another state, a fresh start with better pay and no memories of their old life. The kids were excited about the adventure, about starting somewhere where no one knew their mother's reputation. He called to tell me the night before they left. We talked for hours about everything that had happened, about guilt and regret and moving forward. He thanked me for exposing the truth, even though the method had been harsh. His children were healing, he said. They laughed now, really laughed, not the nervous giggles they used to do when trying to please their mother. The morning they left, my sister-in-law somehow found out. She showed up at their apartment as they were loading the moving truck, screaming about kidnapping and court orders. But the custody agreement allowed the move, and she had no legal ground to stand on. The neighbors watched as she followed the moving truck down the street on foot, screaming until her voice gave out. Someone filmed it and posted it online, where it went modestly viral as "Crazy Lady Chases Moving Truck." She became a meme for about a week before the internet moved on to the next spectacle. That evening, there was a family dinner at Grandma's house. It was quieter quieter than usual, with my brother's absence keenly felt. But there was also a sense of peace that had been missing for years. No one was comparing children's achievements. No one was bragging about expensive purchases. No one was making cruel comments disguised as jokes. Halfway through dinner, phones started buzzing. My sister-in-law had sent a mass text to everyone, including extended family members who hadn't been involved in the drama. It was a photo of her at what looked like an upscale restaurant, dressed in designer clothes she couldn't possibly afford anymore, with a glass of champagne raised to the camera. The caption read, "Living my best life without toxic people. My success is the best revenge. Watch me rise while you all stay stuck in your mediocrity." No one responded. We'd all learned that silence was the best response to her provocations. Later, my cousin did some investigating and discovered the photo was taken at a hotel lobby during a free wine tasting event. The designer clothes were rentals from a subscription service she'd somehow managed to sign up for, despite her financial situation. The image of success was as fake as everything else about her, but she'd never stopped trying to compete, even with no one left to play against. She'd never stopped needing to be better than everyone else, even when she'd lost everything in the pursuit. That night, as my wife and I got ready for bed, she asked if I regretted what we'd done. I thought about it for a long time. The deception had been cruel, calculated, and had caused massive collateral damage. But it had also exposed a truth that needed to be revealed, freed 3 children from a toxic situation, and finally broken the cycle of enabling that had allowed my sister-in-law's behavior to escalate for years. "I regret that it came to this," I finally said, "but I don't regret protecting our family." She nodded, understanding. We'd all paid a price for the truth, but sometimes the cost of silence was even higher. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed one more time. Another text from my sister-in-law, this time linked to a GoFundMe she'd created, claiming to be a victim of family abuse who needed help getting back on her feet. The goal was set at $50,000. So far, she'd raised nothing. I deleted the message without reading it fully and put my phone away. Tomorrow would bring new attempts at manipulation, new lies, new competitions with imaginary opponents. But we were done playing her games. The war was over, even if she'd never admit defeat. I stared at the deleted message notification on my phone screen. 6 months of calculated revenge, and she was still trying to manipulate anyone who'd listen. My wife rolled over beside me, her hand finding mine in the darkness. The next morning brought an unexpected development. My mother called during breakfast, her voice shaking. My sister-in-law had shown up at her workplace, creating a scene in the hospital lobby where she volunteered. Security had escorted her out, but not before she'd screamed to everyone that my mother was harboring kidnappers. I drove my mother to file a restraining order that afternoon. The courthouse clerk recognized the name immediately. Apparently, my sister-in-law had been there multiple times trying to file various complaints against family members. None had been taken seriously. 2 days later, my cousin forwarded me screenshots from a local community Facebook group. My sister-in-law had posted asking for recommendations for lawyers who specialized in parental alienation cases. The comments were brutal. Several people recognized her from the viral video of her chasing the moving truck. One commenter mentioned seeing her get removed from the elementary school for trying to access her children's records without custody rights. My brother called that weekend from his new state. The kids had started at their new school and were thriving without the pressure, but he'd received notice that my sister-in-law was petitioning the court to prevent the children from being enrolled anywhere without her consent. She'd also filed complaints with Child Protective Services in both states, claiming neglect. The investigator who showed up at my brother's new apartment was apologetic, but thorough. She interviewed each child separately. The oldest told her about the studying until vomiting. The middle child showed her old diary entries about wanting to disappear. The youngest drew pictures of a happy family, notably missing one parent. The investigation was closed within a week, with no findings of neglect. Instead, the investigator recommended continued therapy and praised my brother for the stable environment he'd created. My sister-in-law's response was to double down. She started showing up at places she thought we'd be. My wife encountered her at the farmer's market, where she loudly told vendors that my wife was a child abuser. When that didn't work, she tried the library during children's story time, the community pool, even our dentist's office. Each time, she was asked to leave. Each time, she made a bigger scene. The breaking point came during month 7. My nephew's new school was having a spring concert, and somehow my sister-in-law found out. She drove 6 hours to attend, arriving just as the children were taking the stage. My brother spotted her immediately and alerted security, but she'd already made her way to the front row. As my nephew began his violin solo, something he'd chosen to learn for fun, not competition, she stood up and started shouting corrections at him. The music stopped. 200 parents turned to stare. My nephew's hands shook as he lowered his violin. Security moved in, but my sister-in-law grabbed onto the auditorium seats, screaming that she had a right to see her son perform. It took 3 security guards to remove her. My nephew never finished his solo. The other 2 children, who'd been in the chorus, were found hiding in the bathroom after the concert, terrified she'd try to take them. The school banned her from the property and increased security measures. My brother had to explain the situation to the principal, the teachers, the other parents who'd witnessed the meltdown. The kids needed extra therapy sessions to process the trauma of seeing her again. A week after the concert incident, my sister-in-law was arrested. She'd been caught trying to break into my brother's old apartment, convinced he'd hidden assets there. The new tenants had called the police when they found her attempting to jimmy the lock at 2 a.m. She spent the night in jail. Her mother refused to post bail. The arrest made the local news. The reporter connected it to the viral video, the school incident, the restraining orders. My sister-in-law's carefully crafted image was destroyed completely. The boutique where she worked let her go. The parenting blog she'd started was flooded with negative comments before she took it down. She moved in with a distant relative 2 states away, someone who hadn't heard the full story. That lasted exactly 1 week before she was asked to leave for criticizing how they raised their children. My phone rang late one night in August. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was different, flat, exhausted. She asked if I was satisfied, if I'd gotten what I wanted, if destroying her life had made me feel better about Emma. I told her the truth, that Emma was gone forever because of a preventable tragedy, that her cruelty had made our grief unbearable, that her children deserved better than a mother who saw them as trophies. She hung up without responding. 2 weeks later, my brother forwarded me an email. She'd finally agreed to supervised visitation on the condition she complete parenting classes and therapy. The first session was scheduled for the following month. The night before the visit, the kids were anxious. The oldest said he didn't want to go. The middle child had stress hives. The youngest wet the bed for the first time in months. My brother almost canceled, but the therapist said it was important to try. The children needed to see that their mother had no power over them. them anymore. The visitation center was sterile, designed for safety rather than comfort. My sister-in-law arrived 15 minutes late. Her hair dyed a different color, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. She looked smaller somehow. The supervisor later told my brother that she'd spent the first 10 minutes crying. Not manipulative tears, but genuine breakdown. The children sat frozen until the oldest finally asked if she was okay. She tried to compose herself, asked about their new school. The middle child tentatively showed her an art project. The youngest stayed pressed against his siblings, not speaking. When she asked why they left her, the oldest found his courage. He told her about the pressure, the fear, the constant competition. He said he just wanted to be a kid. She started to argue, then stopped. For the first time, she seemed to actually see her children instead of her projections of them. The visit ended quietly. No screaming, no accusations. Just a broken woman watching her children leave with their father. She attended 3 more visits over the next month, each one slightly less tense. She learned their new interests: art, music for fun, sports they actually enjoyed. She didn't criticize once, then she disappeared. My brother received a text saying she needed time to think. The visits stopped, the calls stopped, even the social media posts ended. 3 months passed in silence. The kids slowly relaxed, stopped looking over their shoulders. They made friends, they laughed freely. They were just normal children.